Pretty good. Excited to get going. So yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, absolutely. Should I screen share now or a bit later? But I'll share now. Absolutely not. Yeah, probably. So let's see. Okay, let's not mess this up. Chrome tab window. I'm gonna do a Chrome tab. I'm feeling confident about that one. But I guess I'll just quickly go through like what Patchstack is. We're basically a cybersecurity application security company, and we cover the full WordPress vulnerability lifecycle. So all the way from detection to mitigation. We mostly work with or offer these protection services to hosts and agencies. Uh, sort of the work we do is also backed by a large community of ethical hackers. Um, there's about 2,000, I think, ethical hackers, Discord group, and they're basically, going around looking for vulnerabilities in WordPress plugins and themes, and they report them, through our platform. And we're actually the leading or the biggest WordPress vulnerability disclosure in the space. So about 60 to 70% of vulnerabilities they find each year come through the research community that Patchstack runs. But we also partner with a lot of plugins like Elementor, WP Bakery, Slider Revolution, so on and so forth, with about 1,000 plugins, and we basically run an MVDP program for them where we basically filter out like their vulnerability reports that people find in their plugins. These reports come to us, and our team basically works together with these plugin companies to make sure that fixes are issued in time and that they're done properly. So we do a lot of like different stuff around WordPress security. But I would say first off, when we were talking like before, like I think on Monday you said like it would be nice to also get into why vulnerabilities matter or what's the problem that we're actually solving, right? So I thought about it. Here's how I would start. So I'll start with a myth. And this is something that I hear quite a lot, usually from regular users, a little bit less from like agencies and less from like hosting companies. But the big myth around WordPress and security is that my website is too small to get hacked. Like nobody knows my bakery website. Why would a hacker want to target me? Uh, but the reality of that is that hackers are not really targeting websites, they're targeting plugins. So, what hackers do is they basically strike hundreds of thousands of plugins at once in mass scale attacks. So, for example, imagine you have a vulnerability in a plugin that has maybe 200,000 installs. Uh, Essentially, and if it's a severe vulnerability, what attackers can do is hit all of those 200 websites at the same time in a mass scale attack, and then figure out what they want to do with the catch. So, kind of like modern hacking is kind of like it's. I like to sort of say it's similar to like ocean trawling or fishing. It's like you're not taking a fishing rod out to go fishing with your pop, but you're actually dragging this massive net down an ocean floor, and you're basically pulling up whatever gets caught in the net, right? So it's completely automated. It's mass scale. So that's why the WordPress vulnerabilities pose such a big risk. Um, there's another sort of it's a kind of an old problem, but it's a problem that traditional security methods really haven't successfully solved or don't handle very well. And I'll get into it a little bit because it can be a bit technical, but I'll do my best to uh, sort of explain it as simply as I can. But so last year we actually did a major study. So we took 18 hosting companies and their different like security setups, which was usually like web application firewalls, cloud layers, and different kind of tools. And we ran pen testing on these sites, honeypot sites we set up on their servers. And what we discovered was that the various traditional defenses like firewalls, tools like Cloudflare that people have always assumed are enough to keep us safe from vulnerability exploits. Only 26% of these attacks were blocked, by these tools on average. So that's quite a stunning percentage. So that's a very low success rate, and that's because vulnerability exploits are really they're very specific security issues that they're very difficult to protect against using traditional like pattern recognition firewalls and stuff like that. Because essentially, a vulnerability in WordPress, let's say a plugin, is nothing more than a coding mistake. It's a logic problem. So any request, like a malicious request you send against that vulnerability to a regular firewall, just looks like a normal thing. The plugin says it's okay to do, so it doesn't really raise any red flags because it's looking for very generic patterns, right? But that's the problem with all firewalls. Firewalls, even if they have custom rules to catch like edge cases, these rules tend to be very generic because if you make these rules very strict, they start restricting normal traffic, and then you basically that's when normal people can't access your site, and that's also not good, right? You can't. Some firewalls, they use a lot of custom rules, so like more severe vulnerabilities get a custom rule set. But if you run too many rules at the same time, you're going to get performance problems, right? Some services use sort of traditional or standard virtual patching to sort of restrict traffic that sort of looks like it's going to exploit a vulnerability, but some of these solutions are a bit invasive because they alter the actual code in a website. And that's something you also don't want to do because that's going to cause you a lot of problems, all kinds of problems. And then we have the speed problem. So last year we did every year we do actually a big security themed white paper. And in this year's white paper, we actually released it just less than a month ago. We looked at our attack data of like websites that are connected to our services, and what we found was that that it took on average just 5 hours for the really severe vulnerabilities to get mass exploited. So from the time a vulnerability news came out, on average like 5 hours, and you have mass exploit campaigns targeting thousands upon thousands of sites already running. So it's a problem because let's say you're a regular firewall, and even if you have a rule against a new vulnerability that was just discovered, you're probably finding out about it at the same time as the hackers. So then, how fast can your team react to create the custom rule, ship the custom rule? If you're a developer and you're relying on, let's say, plugin updates to, keep your site safe, and it's 1 a.m. and you're sleeping, and the window is within hours of you have hours before attacks start. Like how fast can you get out of bed? And by the time you read, obviously the news, like an email newsletter, it's probably too late, right? So that's kind of the time factor is really, really critical because hackers move really fast. In cases where they feel like, okay, this is big news, we can really exploit this. I think the fastest I've seen personally up close is like 2 hours. There was a vulnerability in the bricks page builder, I think a couple of years back. So it was like, I think 2 hours, and those mass attacks were going. It was nuts. Speed problem. Another angle of the speed problem is that, and this is it's a compounding problem, is that actually last year, 46% of the vulnerabilities that were disclosed publicly, they were not fixed by the developer in time of disclosure. So by the time the news went public, developers still hadn't fixed. In some cases, they never fix these things. In some cases, it just takes them like maybe a few days. But again, like days compared to hours of attacks, it's just not enough, right? The fix has to come up at the same time as the news, and that's what we do with most vulnerabilities that we find. We always get in touch with the plugin developer, and we really try to get them to get the fix out as soon as possible. So by the time the news goes out, that's fixed. But that's not always the case. But it's another problem when you're relying on updates to keep yourself safe. Like updates are a good security measure in a way, but they don't work if there is no security update. So yeah, that's another sort of a speed issue. I guess a little bit about Patchstack. Like, so where do we come in, right? So what do we do? We're quite good at catching and mitigating vulnerabilities because we we focus on vulnerabilities 100%. That's all we do basically, with some other minor security settings. But all of our business is basically about finding WordPress vulnerabilities and mitigating them as fast as possible. So we use something called Rapid Mitigate to do that. So a Rapid Mitigate is basically a combination of our intelligence. It's a combination of some virtual patching and some custom firewall rules. We call it Rapid Mitigate because we used to call it virtual patching, but then we found a few years ago, and then we found like other companies started calling it virtual patching, when they just launched some rules. So we said, damn it, now we got to brand this thing so we can be clear that we don't just do virtual patching. And I'm not going to get into what the difference is too much, but what I will say is the reason Patchstack works, let's say, better than a firewall is that it's not really a tool or like a security plugin; it's a system. And the system consists of different aspects. So one, we have that enormous research organization, these hundreds or thousands of hackers who report vulnerabilities through us. That means we are usually the first ones to know whenever there's like a potential vulnerability coming up. So that gives us basically that early warning advantage, and that means for our users we can protect them up to 48 hours before public disclosure. So that's when we let our users know when the protection goes out earlier. And by the time the news breaks, it's like, Patchstack users don't really have to worry about it, right? We use a plugin that's not really a security plugin, but it's a small, lightweight plugin that basically gives us real-time visibility into each and every connected website that's been connected to the Patchstack backend, like the service. And that plugin also allows us to deploy rules into each connected website, but only when they're actually needed. So we don't deploy. So, some firewalls have rules, like maybe 10, 20, whatever. We have 14,000 as of this moment.
Wow. Yeah.
Because every single vulnerability, that's a lot. So we create a custom rule for every single vulnerability that has a potential to be exploited.
I'm curious, how does that process, what does that look like at the back end if you have people, you actually have like physical
We actually
human,
have a team that does
you
this.
have actual physical human beings doing
We
this, right? This
have
is not all automated.
no.
Yeah.
I think parts of it can be automated, and that's something that we increasingly discuss. But obviously, because it's such a core component of what we offer, it's not something we want to carelessly automate like too much,
Yeah.
because there is some custom stuff involved. Again, because the vulnerabilities that we're dealing with, they are very unique. Like there's like really clever ways to exploit them. So you kind of have to have these very different rule sets, and they have to be individual. But they're also individual because it's like literally we can deploy these rules for a very specific vulnerability only on a website that actually has that vulnerability. So we're not obviously running 14,000 rules on every website. That would be insane. I think that would be crazy. But we only real time we see, okay, new vulnerability came out, or we know about it ahead of time. These websites have it. We apply protection real time. There's no updates required. It doesn't change any code. It's literally a JSON rule that basically looks at incoming traffic, and we're looking for very specific requests that match that very specific vulnerability and a very specific exploit pattern, and we only protect that. So everything else stays functional, but it's that little contextual sort of hyper targeted rule that can be taken on or put on or taken off at any time, basically.
So that creates very low overhead, I imagine, uh,
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
site, so you don't see a lot of slowdown or any at all if it's just targeting.
I think it's virtually no slowdown because
Yeah.
we've benchmarked this on we've set up a site with like 100 vulnerabilities, which is a theoretical. It's practically that's impossible. Like if I see
Sure.
if I saw one website with 100 vulnerabilities, I want to give that person a medal because that would be quite a feat. But even then, I think the performance impact was something like 0.0001 milliseconds or something. It is really
Imperceptible.
negligible.
Yeah.
Basically, it's not a problem. So,
Yeah.
and again, the code change is another thing that we don't do. So that's sometimes what people fear is if it's a virtual patch, is it gonna literally overwrite my plugin code? So that's not something we do, and it's something you should not do at any cost. So that's us. How it looks like. So the Patchstack product itself, it's you log in. Typically, let's say you're an agency, you have a lot of these. Obviously, exaggerated numbers here in terms of vulnerabilities. Again, 333. It's our support engineer probably built a website trying to push the limits of what we do. But you have a list of websites. You see, you can group them. Obviously, you see which protection modules are enabled by default. It's always the rapid mitigate. That's the core protection. But we have like hardening modules as well. You see activity at a glance. How many pieces of plugins or software is installed, how many are vulnerable, so on and so on and so forth. You can dig into there's a separate dashboard that sort of gives you also info on how many threats have been blocked for a date time range. You can dig into we have activity log as well. You can dig into see what's been blocked exactly, what the latest vulnerabilities. You can group them any way you want. What kind of vulnerabilities you have in the sites, how severe they are, and so on and so forth, all the way down to an individual website level. So you can dig in and see. Okay, so here we have 2 vulnerabilities, all in. Let's say just an example. It's a good example because in this specific example, there's 2 vulnerabilities in WordPress core and they're low priority. And that's something that's very important to actually know, is that not all WordPress vulnerabilities are dangerous, but a large chunk of them are. So we classify them into high and medium priority. And these are the ones. High is something you absolutely need to deal with, otherwise you get hit. Medium is you have maybe 7 days, like the horror movie, right? So it's 7 days, and then probably do something about it. And then low means that at this present time, we don't see a way for this to get mass exploited or easily. It's not really practically exploitable. But it's interesting because here we see actually there's threats blocked because the hardening modules do block other types of attacks as well. So there's so much junk being thrown at websites every day, not just those mass attacks, but for example, we block things like direct access to certain PHP files and stuff like that. There's some other stuff under the hood, just to provide that super extra layer that's specific to WordPress.
Yeah.
I'll actually stop the slideshow here.
Okay.
So go back to seeing my face for a second. But,
okay.
But I'll say, I guess I'll add. I had a couple of sources here as well. That if anybody wants to read more into these things, there's a lot of super interesting stuff. We just published the State of WordPress Security 2026 white paper. It's worth a read to see what the threat landscape looks like, or it's gonna be like in WordPress. And on our website, there's a very convenient URL. Maybe we can later add a link to it.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and add the link.
Well. Yeah. So there's, we get into a lot of these. We do quite a bit of study pieces, try to dig into these questions and topics. And and again, at a later time, if you want to ask me anything, my email's here as well. I'm probably more responsive on LinkedIn. I'm bad with my emails, but my inbox is a chaos. But
email is so 2023.
It's just I struggle with the influx of
yeah.
But I do read it.
Yeah.
I do read it. Yeah. I think I stopped sharing successfully.
Perfect. So I think one of the questions that pops into my mind that I think might be a little confusing to some people is you kind of covered what Patchstack does, and it attacks threats and vulnerabilities, but how does that really differ from, say, a firewall at, say, the Cloudflare level or something like that? I mean, I've always kind of come from the standpoint of everything should be protected at the server level rather than at the point of WordPress. And so how does Patchstack, why would you want Patchstack on top of the firewall that maybe you're already using with your host?
Yeah. I mean, I would actually. So when I mentioned that, that these traditional tools, and I specifically mentioned, for example, Cloudflare, which actually is one of the better ones. So it can actually catch some more generic vulnerabilities better than some other solutions. But I would actually say, like you should actually use Cloudflare too.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I look at security is I think you're supposed to cover different layers.
Mm-hmm.
So WordPress is just a very different beast, because it's like when we look at these vulnerabilities and whether they're exploitable and how they're exploited, there's factors like user access rights and what kind of users does the site have, what privileges they have. So you need, via a plugin, that's what we have. You basically need a visibility into the actual WordPress website to see what's going on, what that site is made of, and that's something you can't necessarily do otherwise. But the other thing again is that just like the mitigation rules have to be specific anyway. So that's the other angle of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so then Patchstack is specific to WordPress and nothing else, right? WordPress vulnerabilities.
Actually, we also covered Drupal and Joomla
Okay.
as of
Okay.
I think 2 years ago now.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
so anything PHP based.
Anything
basically.
PHP based. Okay. So why would you
anything PHP based except right now it's WordPress, Drupal, and Joomla. So not everything PHP based.
Okay.
For now.
Okay. Yeah. And so then why would you do that? And then how does that compare to another WordPress plugin, like say, for instance, WordFence or something?
Yeah.
Which is at the same level as far as, it's a plugin that you install and runs on WordPress.
Yeah. So I would actually say that Patchstack is not a security plugin.
Okay.
Because for us, the plugin is basically nothing more than a intelligence and delivery tool. So the only reason we need to have a plugin on any given website that's connected to our services, it's basically just that it connects a website to our services. So we know what's in any given website, and that it's also like a delivery vehicle just for those firewall rules and the hardening setting as well. So there's a WAF component in there, like I guess you can describe it as a kind of a web application firewall in and of itself. But I wouldn't say it's a security plugin, because I think the term security plugin usually refers to like a broader set of features that are, and often it refers to like malware scanning maybe and broader features. But I would say we don't really think of Patchstack as necessarily a plugin, but more like a tool. And that's why we actually started using that rapid mitigate term to illustrate that the plugin itself is it's just one aspect of this bigger service we do, because that ethical research community and the ability to craft these protection rules manually it's like a combined system. It's like a Patriot missile system, right? So it's not just the rocket, but it's like the radar. It's your ability to identify targets and preemptively plan like your strikes and stuff like that.
Okay. And so Patchstack will like flag things, your vulnerabilities and things like that, and something like maybe WordFence or something like that. Would you say that that's more designed to like prevent things like DDoS attacks and things like that? And Patchstack isn't, or
No, DDoS you do at I think the network level, right? It's a little bit higher. So that's again like Cloudflare. I would say that's why you need Cloudflare. It's like and just to come back to that layer principle is like we really do only one thing, and it's just the vulnerability exploits, and we do it. And the reason we do it well is that we're just laser focused on it. That's literally our obsession, right?
Yeah.
But so this is like this is one of those territories where you don't want to say anything bad. But
No,
I
I
would
understand.
say.
Yeah. Well, we won't make. I just use it as an example, but.
I would say like there's things. Another thing is malware scanning. That's it is actually also an important component of security, because you still need to be able to scan for malware, because threats, you can have infections come from different sources, not just vulnerabilities. That's very common for WordPress, but you can get a site compromised, let's say by stolen session cookies somebody uses. These get traded on the black market. Your admin, if your site owner happens to have admin privileges and they use a weak password and no 2FA, don't do that. So that's an immediate dictionary passwords, right? If you can read it, if you can spell it, don't use it as a password. That's
right.
another way. That's so you do need that malware. If you're like an agency, I would recommend having something just to make sure, also before you add Patchstack, you scan the site,
Mm-hmm.
because once the site is infected, adding Patchstack on top is not going to remove that problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but I would say I would. I mean, WordPress does have I would say a good firewall, for example, like a generic more firewall. Uh, but for malware scanning, I would recommend looking at like server-side solutions because these days, previously, I think plugin-based malware scanning used to be a big thing in WordPress. But the problem is that any compromised environment, such as a compromised WordPress website, you have to assume that everything in there is well compromised, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and what certain newer types of malware, pieces of malware do is they get in there and they look for plugins that are security plugins
Mm-hmm.
first thing.
Mm-hmm.
So their first task is to disable that and then do whatever the hell they want to do.
Okay.
So it's yeah, and then there's it gets freakier. There's like serverless, there's like fileless malware. That's like malware that lives in RAM packages and stuff like that.
Mm,
That's not even in your file system. It gets weird. Like hackers are
yeah.
clever. They're,
This is all way above my pay grade, let me tell you.
it's above my pay grade. I'm just learning about these things as I go along. But yeah,
You probably hear these things and you're like, what now?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's such
Yeah.
an interesting
Yeah.
field. I think like every day you learn. It's a hacker mentality, and it's for the good hackers and the bad hackers.
Right.
But the hacker mentality is this ability to think outside the box and go like, okay, so here's all these walls they have.
Yeah.
How can I get in? Like,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
weird stuff can I do to just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what will I think now? So
Yeah.
it's a fascinating word. So
Yeah. Well, that's
uh,
I think that
yeah.
everybody has a little bit of hacker in them. I think that anyone who's stood in a bank has sat in line and said, "Oh, I wonder how hard it would be to to rob this bank," or is that just me?
I like
But
dark, intrusive thoughts. Yeah, like
yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
you go like,
yeah. It's just some do it and some don't, and some are obsessed with it and some aren't, I imagine. Um, so let's say that Patchstack uh, flags
yeah.
something. Okay, what would be the next step for an agency or someone to perform in order to deal with that? Because Patchstack doesn't, well, if Patchstack knows the vulnerability, if I understand, it will prevent that from happening.
Yeah, it will prevent. So
Yeah.
if you're a Patchstack customer,
Mm-hmm.
you don't. So technically, you don't need to do anything. What we
Okay.
essentially do is we buy you the time.
Okay.
I mentioned before that these attacks can happen very fast. Sometimes there is no update. So in case of attacks that are either have a high probability of being exploited or like a even smaller one, if we deem it like dangerous enough, you're protected anyway. So you just buy the time. But I would say and from a non-technical user perspective, I would say you can basically ignore those vulnerable plugins and just like as long as patch check is on, our the rapid mitigate system will keep preventing any like malicious requests against those specific vulnerabilities.
Okay.
But as a security company representative, I should say that you should update your plugins, even if these are mitigated. You should go in and either find alternatives to
Mm-hmm.
plugins that don't have security fixes, or update the ones that have a security fix ready. It's just not a good idea to keep vulnerable software for extended periods of time in
Right.
your site.
Right.
So we really buy the time, right? So it's like so you don't have to. So the problem is, updating. Like you might want to run some tests before you do an update. It might take you time before you even realize that there's a vulnerability. You see the news 2 days later, right? So it takes off that time pressure. So you don't have you can sort of update stuff at your own time, like once a week or whatever, instead of reacting to it. So
Yeah, no, for sure. It definitely seems like what
yeah,
I could see this as being something that allows you to be proactive rather than reactive.
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
As a tool because like you said it's buying you that extra time and I think that that's huge because everybody hates having their workflow interrupted obviously so so when you have that opportunity to proactively solve a problem as opposed to like flipping out and I mean I imagine your team is just like consuming gallons and gallons of coffee a day, you know, just to stay on
Um,
top of all this stuff. But uh, Maybe it's just how I imagine things going. I imagine like this control room where there's like all these people that are just constantly watching. But
they are a very productive bunch. Yeah,
yeah,
the research arm of
yeah.
Patchstack is it's a boiler room. So it's
Well,
like
you
uh,
maintain, I think the is it the largest database of WordPress
yeah.
vulnerabilities? Yeah.
So yeah, so I would say it's there's other databases, but I would say in terms of like new research and new vulnerabilities discovered, yeah, we find the largest number of them. And actually, I think actually as of last year, Patchstack became the largest ever vulnerability disclosure across all software, like
Mm,
surpassing Microsoft, I think.
wow. Wow.
So we have more, yeah, like we have issued more CVIDs
Mm,
for vulnerabilities than Microsoft. So it's
wow.
like that's a wild
That's
scale, right?
that's pretty big. And this stuff fascinates me, and I could probably talk forever just about all
Yeah,
of
oh
that.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
but there's also
yep.
another side of this, which is we started talking to you at MainWP a few months ago about integrating Patchstack with MainWP
Mm,
because one of the things that I think a lot of people, agencies in particular, uh, like about MainWP, of course, is that you can manage everything from one centralized dashboard. Rather than, for instance,
mhm,
if you have Patchstack running on 200 different sites, and you have to go through and deal with that on each site, that can get a little bit time consuming and obviously for any business, the ability to scale is super important. And so we started talking to you a few months ago, and we worked closely with your team to develop an integration, an add-on for MainWP that allows you to bring all of that data into MainWP. So, what I have here, and I am hoping we will not have technical difficulties here, is I have a quick, it's really kind of an overview of what the Patchstack MainWP uh, integration does. And then in the show notes, there's also a link to the actual walkthrough and installation process of the Patchstack MainWP. And then after that, I have a couple of questions from users that I will ask. So I'm going to run this video really quick, which is just the overview, and then we'll get into some of the other things. So let me, fingers crossed, here we go.
Bring Patchstack's vulnerability monitoring into your MainWP dashboard. Protect your sites and see where risks live without leaving MainWP. Enter your Patchstack API key once, bulk install the Patchstack security plugin on all child sites, and every site is
In
instantly
the
connected to your
show
Patchstack
notes,
account.
there's also a link
Check each
to the
site's
actual
protection status,
walkthrough and
detected
installation
vulnerabilities,
process
and
of
pending
the
updates,
Patchstack
all
MainWP.
synced directly from
And then
Patchstack's
after that,
API.
I have a couple of questions from users that I will ask. So I'm going
Charts
to
and
run
logs
this
track
video
blocked
really quick, which
attacks,
is
active threats,
just
and
the
firewall events.
overview,
See global
and
data
then
across
we'll
all your
get
sites,
into
or
some of
dive
the other
into
things.
individual
So
site views.
let me,
Patchstack doesn't
fingers
live in a
crossed,
silo.
here we go.
Key details surface in your global overview and flow into pro reports, so protection insights are always within reach. Bring Patchstack's vulnerability monitoring into your MainWP dashboard. Bring Patchstack protect your sites and see where risks live without leaving MainWP. Keep your entire network secure. Enter your Patchstack API key once. Try the MainWP bulk install the Patchstack security plugin on all child sites, and every site is
In
instantly
the
connected to your
show
Patchstack
notes,
account.
there's also a link
Check each
to
site's
the actual
protection status,
walkthrough and
detected
installation
vulnerabilities,
process
and
of
pending
the
updates,
Patchstack
all
MainWP.
synced directly from
And then
Patchstack's
after that,
API.
I have a talk about the integration. So you would have to subscribe. The integration is free, but then you have to subscribe to the Patchstack service. So we've worked out a partnership with you, and why don't you talk a little bit about the special that we have going on for MainWP users?
Yeah. So yeah, you do need a Patchstack account to take advantage of this if you're a main WP user. But yeah, we wanted to give everybody who signs up to Patchstack, from your platform, 20% off for the first 6 months, and that includes actually our 30-day free trial as well. So then you
Okay.
have like a 30-day period to actually even try it out, like completely free of charge, to see, like, play around with it, and see if that fits you.
And that's on the developer package, correct?
On the developer plan, yeah.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
And what does the developer plan consist of exactly?
So it's the absolutely most important thing is the rapid mitigate, the protection module. So the ability to basically, essentially ahead of time, protect your websites for new vulnerabilities that are coming out. From a manager point of view, but MainWP kind of like takes it almost over if you integrate these two. There's a dashboard that you can manage all your sites from. But practically, from a product perspective, there's also like hardening modules, like various sort of like very WordPress specific security settings that sort of just give you that bit of extra cover for, let's say, mischief that hackers want to do against WordPress sites specific. So I mentioned, like, sort of blocking certain attempts at directly accessing certain files and stuff like that. And there's also like the ability to create your own security rules. So should you need that, if that's part of your setup, you can do that as well. There's like simpler custom rules you can create, but all the way to like pretty advanced stuff that you can write. So it's like it's more like a developer tool in that sense. Yeah,
okay. Okay. And does that, so the developer plan covers up to 25 sites, and then if they add, let's say that you have 100 sites or 1,000 sites, I know that your pricing scales accordingly. Does that 20% apply to the scale as well?
So that it applies only to the base price.
Okay.
And because full disclosure, that's how on the back end our pricing system works. So it's hard to make it scale for like the additional, because it's 25 sites at first. We set that limit because that's usually, we find below that is when agencies come to us and get started, and then it's you add in increments of 5. You can start adding more and more and more and more, depending on what you need, or take off some again, depending on need. So yeah.
Okay, that's okay. So then the other question I have is, and this came from a user. One of the things that that they brought up was that there is a SaaS management platform that's offering their pricing at $2 per month, and this boils down to with MainWP, it's boiling down to about $253 per month. So it's a little bit more expensive on the surface. It seems like it's more expensive, but why don't you explain why that is and what the difference is?
Yeah. I think very broadly, our point is usually just to make security as easily accessible, in just vulnerabilities, that is, so as many different types of users as possible. It is a bit cheaper in some platforms. Some hosting companies also integrate. Like sometimes it's part of like an advanced managed service, but more often it's like a security add-on that you pay for on a per site basis. That kind of varies. But the main reason is that it is a little bit more expensive on the Patchstack platform because of that, direct control over all your sites. You can run updates from there, the hardening settings, and the advanced custom rule sets. So that's where that difference comes in. So if you get it from, let's say, a hosting company, you're basically just getting the rapid mitigate protection. So that's how the core offering. Yeah, just the vulnerability mitigation, basically, but not really the sort of bells and whistles and the additional parameters or rules you want to play around with.
So things like being able to, for instance, with our integration, you have the ability to provide information in your pro reports and things like that. That's stuff that that they wouldn't be able to do unless they.
Exactly, and it's kind of like, I think, different strokes for different folks. It's like depending on what your stack is, what kind of tool you like using, and what makes sense for your agency.
Sure.
So sometimes if it's like another management tool makes sense, and it's like it's part of that, totally up to you. But yeah, if you wanna have this deeper integration with MainWP, that's the other way to do it.
I see. And I mean, there's a lot of other differences. For instance, I did a little bit of math, and I figured out that right now MainWP is running a special on our annual plan for 149 a year because it's our 12th year anniversary and we're going big on that and all that. So 149 a year. So really, if you were to compare to a SaaS model out there, at about 23 sites, that's when you would actually break even compared to their price because you're not paying for scale with MainWP when it comes to the management side of the dashboard, right? So at about 23 sites, even though it initially looks a little bit more expensive, you actually end up paying less once you get to 23 sites. Then you're actually going to be paying less than you would with a SaaS model. So there's that also to consider. So you get more, right? And you also at scale, it becomes less and less expensive ultimately to be able to do that. So let's see. I think that's about it, unless there are any questions from the viewers. If anyone has a question, this would be the time to ask. And because there's a little bit of a delay between when I'm actually talking to you and when it shows up on YouTube, I'm going to fill the space with singing. No, I am not going to do that. I wouldn't do that to you. So, but if there are any other questions, other than that, I think that answers most of the questions. You did a really good job with the presentation. So I would say to anyone who is watching, please take a look at the show notes. I will update them immediately after this with any links. And then we do have the promotion going with Patchstack, and I think I'll put those in the notes too for MainWP users. And I think that's about it. I really appreciate your time. I know that it's kind of near the end of the day for you, so appreciate it.
It's pretty okay. It's actually just past 5 p.m., so it's
Okay,
okay.
okay. Did you have anything that you wanted to add?
No. I think the only thing is if anybody wants to, again, I'm not a difficult person to find. So
Yeah,
you can always add me on LinkedIn, ask more stuff there if you want, or via email, open to that. So always happy to.
And of course,
talk about these things.
Yeah, and of course everyone knows how to and Dennis, who's the founder, he said that Patchstack add-on is in the essential plan, which is free, right? So it is a free add-on, which is very cool. You don't even have to get the MainWP Pro, so you can potentially scale with just the essentials plan with MainWP, and you can still scale, and then you're definitely paying less than you would anywhere else. So that's a really good point. So other than that, I think that is it. I appreciate your time, and you all know how to get a hold of Mart, and everybody, I hope, knows how to get a hold of me. I'm pretty much everywhere. And of course, the whole MainWP team, they're wildly available all over the place. Discord, LinkedIn, you name it, we're there. So appreciate it, and we hope we can, if you have any other questions about Patchstack or our integration or MainWP, let us know.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye, Thank everybody. You.
Bye. Bye.
All right. I think we're done. Okay. Well, just